Dear colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank for the invitation to come to Berlin. It's a great honor and great privilege to be here and to talk to you for 15 minutes under this cryptic title, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Cultural heritage is the essential record of human existence and identity. It is actually the thread of continuity for which people search when the rhythm of their everyday life has been shattered, from the Museum Island in Berlin to the protest camp in Standing Rock, North Dakota. There's a strong allegiance to World Heritage which connects people across all cultural and political boundaries, no matter where you come from and no matter what you studied. We all immediately tend to understand the significance of cultural natural heritage. Just come a little bit too late in the morning to Lake Louise in Canada in the Rocky Mountains. When the first tourist buses have arrived, you will have a hard time to take a photo from the lake. On the Jewish cemetery of Unsleben, Bavaria, and with Holocaust survivor Lottie Hess from Unsleben in our class at Yale, we experienced that cultural heritage is bridging cultures and bridging generations. However, it is by no means only a positive resource. Cultural heritage is often contested. A good and recent example are the Confederate monuments in the United States. Some are gone, like in Baltimore. Others are still there. And others, again, are there but hidden or disguised. We are struggling with our heritage, and we are struggling with our heritage all over the world. The late David Löwenthal explains why and what he perceives as the difference between history and heritage. Heritage clarifies pasts so as to infuse them with present purposes, he writes in his book, The Heritage Crusade. Obviously, we are struggling because we have for too long clinched to just one side of the story. Today, as we commemorate in the United States the Indigenous Peoples Day, by the way, October 8th, let's take a look at the Lewis and Clark Memorial in Cutbank, Montana, erected on, as the graffiti says, erected on Blackfeet land. And just to give one example, the time is short, in Western conservation ethics, reduction of use to avoid wear and tear is a basic principle of conservation. For native communities, however, use means preserving culture. What sharing heritage really means, I believe, is to bring this debate together, deal with opposing, even, like in this case, mutually excluding views and seek compromise. The concept of conservation arriving with Western colonializers is also wrong, entirely wrong. There is ample evidence for repair maintenance over centuries, for example, in Timbuktu. Cultural heritage is increasingly threatened with destruction, not only by physical and chemical causes of decay, but also by changing social and economic conditions. Natural and man-made disasters are a very important factor, as illustrated in a horrifying way by the cultural war crimes committed in the Middle East and Africa. The world is changing at a rapid pace, and I think universities, academic programs, and all the stakeholders in heritage preservation have to keep up with this change. Catastrophes like the fire in the National Museum in Rio on September 2nd can happen anywhere and any time. There's no reason to believe it wouldn't happen in the north. We have seen the National Museum burning in Delhi, we have seen big fires in Moscow, and we have just heard about the fire in September 2004 in the Anna Amalia Library in Weimar. We are now over 3 years after the two devastating earthquakes in April and May 2015 that hit Nepal, took almost 9,000 lives, and destroyed a large number of cultural heritage buildings. And it has been already mentioned by the president of the German Archaeological Institute. We also have wider issues. The accelerating global transformation from a rural into an urban society has massive implications on cultural heritage. More than half of the world population already lives in urban areas. Every week, the global urban population, every week, grows by 1.3 million. Tourism, international tourism, is both a source of prosperity and development, but also of decay and deterioration. It takes responsibility, I think, for 9% of the global GDP, for 1 in 11 jobs. It ranks Fourth, behind fuels, chemicals, and food, actually higher than automobiles, right? I mean, that's quite a thing to say in Germany, higher than automobiles. It is, as you can see here in Machu Picchu, you won't have a chance to take your own selfie with the site anymore. Global climate change brings rising seawater levels, increasing floods, and poses an imminent threat to so many sites. Here in the Alaskan village of Shishmaref, an island that has been inhabited continuously for 4,000 years. Today we could read in the news that 3 million people may be affected in Germany alone by rising seawater levels. When a World Heritage Site is lost and destroyed, however, anywhere in the world, we are all diminished, even if it's from another region, from another period, from another culture or another religion. The Holy Father Francis writes in this encyclical letter, Laudato Si, the disappearance of a culture can be just as serious or even more serious than the disappearance of a species of plant or animal. So any loss of cultural heritage is a loss of our common memory, impairing our ability to learn, to build experience, and to apply the lessons of the past to the present and the future. And with this, I think destruction of cultural heritage is inseparable from the persecution of people and therefore truly a humanitarian imperative. Well, looting and illicit traffic, as we will debate over the next days, are not a new phenomenon. The Arch of Titus in Rome depicts the scene of Roman soldiers carrying away the spoils of the Second Temple, in particular the seven-branched menorah, which was brought to Rome and carried along during the triumph of Vespasian and Titus. Not only about art. Napoleon's looting of Germany's collections in the early 19th century affected also natural history and science. Interesting, we learn that when France decided to return these fishes in 1840, they gave more fishes back than they had initially taken, which I think is a good sign that scientists and peer relationships are really working, even in bad times. Well, when thinking about crisis, we should learn to look with the other eye. I am encouraging my students whenever going to a museum, and they should go as often as possible to the museum, ask yourself, where do all these objects come from, which you're seeing in the museum? Ask, why does this sculpture have no feet? Can it be because of the way in which it has been removed from its original location? Also, iconoclasm is by no means an invention by Daesh. From French Revolution to Goya's, he doesn't know what he's doing, to the burning of synagogues in November 1938, to the cultural war crimes committed by Daesh in Iraq. Actually, I want to say how closely those pictures are related, right? You always see somebody on a ladder stepping up to the art and tearing it down. It's very similar. So I believe, most importantly, and I show this picture here from the National Museum in Damascus, taken 2 years ago, I believe we need to be generous, we need to be creative in our support to those who defend cultural heritage in the first line. I think this is a very important conclusion, and I think and my gratitude goes to the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to the DIE, the networks, and many initiatives around the globe who actually do just that, and I think that's very important. When crisis hits, there are several levels where we can intervene. We can avoid, right? We can, not let it happen. It's not so easy with an earthquake, but there's sometimes possibility to avoid damage and threat. We can block it, means not letting it reach the cultural heritage entity. We have to monitor and detect, find out what is happening. Then we have to respond and eventually recover, reconstruct, revitalize post-trauma. In a world where material culture is fragile and at risk, recording and copying can be a tool for cultural preservation. But of course, despite new technologies opening up new possibilities, copying remains politically and socially charged practice. And so does reconstruction. The Lion of Alat, an ancient statue at the temple of pre-Islamic goddess of Alat in Palmyra, you see the sculpture restored in 2005. By a Polish team, destroyed by Daesh in 2015, and actually had been restored last year in Damascus again with the assistance of Polish conservatives. When we talk about reconstruction, I think it's worth mentioning that there are places of memory, such as the route followed by the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, led by Dr. Martin Luther King, where physically there's little or even nothing to be preserved, but because of the events that took place there, the pathway of the march has transcended into national heritage of the United States. With the fourth industrial revolution, we experience increasing collaborative efforts in collecting data, setting standards, and advancing digital technology for cultural heritage preservation across the humanities and sciences. This will require new forms of technology, addressing issues of obsolescence, of legacy technologies, and data migration, and new methods for both formal education in heritage and for public engagement. I think that is also, has been already mentioned, also an important point. When we learn something about our cultural heritage, we actually increase its value. Knowledge is a contribution to the sum of these values. Whether at the Dreikönigenschrein in Cologne, made by Nicholas von Verdun in the 12th century, or whether on Museum Island with the bust of Queen Nefertiti. I think this knowledge needs to be shared among all the stakeholders. And here we have another problem. We have what is called the digital divide. Online resources on the World Wide Web are not a sufficient solution. 54% of the world's population has no access to the internet, and this continuously offline population is disproportionately illiterate, female, elderly, less educated, lower income, and rural. Actually, one of the questions we should ask ourselves is, with all the attempts to increase the depth and of reach of the internet, we didn't really achieve much progress. Very similar to the UNESCO Convention of 1970, right, which was made to curb illicit traffic. And we have to ask ourselves, did it really achieve what it was meant to achieve? And another important lesson is we note a shift from the assumption that cultural heritage is static to a more dynamic picture, when the very essence relies on the inevitability to constantly change, where once we try to prevent change, we now find ourselves managing change, and actually in the best case, sustainably managing change, and the challenge is how to document and change this with accuracy. So preservation is arguably one of the grand challenges of our contemporary world, similar to other grand challenges such as world health and environmental sustainability. UN Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon described cultural heritage when he came to us a few years ago as essential to the United Nations mission of peace, security, sustainable development, and human rights. And last year we have seen Resolution 2347 as the first Security Council resolution to focus exclusively on the protection of cultural heritage. UNESCO plays, and I'm convinced, although our country is supposed to withdraw by the end of this year, plays and will continue to play an essential role in these efforts. Since wars begin in the minds of man, it is in the minds of man that the defenses of peace must be constructed, says the UNESCO Constitution in 1945. So how can people be convinced that notwithstanding all cultural and religious differences, their interests may actually overlap? Who is actually us? And here I come to the end. Universities like Yale and other stakeholders have a critical role in preserving and sharing knowledge and research, and in instilling respect for cultural heritage and for diversity. The energy and the idealism of young people is needed to develop the discipline of heritage preservation and to continuously advance its boundaries. Dr. Martin Luther King writes in August 1963 in his famous letter from the jail in Birmingham, Alabama, what sounds like a perfect way to sum up what cultural heritage means for our society in the current times of change. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. In the roadmap for sustainable conservation of the 21st century, I think conservation is no longer about objects and sites. It has to be also about the people who are affected and connected with this heritage, who want to learn from it, who want to use it, and to feel that it's theirs. Thank you very much.